Julia.
Hello.
And we are
Morning,
now
Julia.
recording.
Okay,
Chair Colombo, I'll be happy to do roll call.
that'd be great. Thank you, Lenny.
Just signal when we're ready.
Okay, okay. Hi, this is Russ Colombo, and I'd like to call the meeting of the Citizens Oversight Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call. So Letty, could you please take a roll call of the members?
Correct. Chair Colombo,
Here.
Mr. Breen,
Peter.
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 Yo, Peter. Are you here?
It looks like he's calling his phone.
he's calling. Okay, I do see him present. Miss Kendall, absent. Mr. Rabinowitz,
Here.
Mr. Bertable, absent. Mr. Harder, absent. Mr. Oster,
Present.
Miss Narette, is that how you pronounce it?
Sarah, present.
Present. And Ms. Violich,
Present.
roll count completed.
Okay, great. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting. It's been obviously a crazy time for everyone, and I think we have a very full agenda today to talk through. The first thing on the menu on the agenda is public comment on non-agenda items. So if there are members of the community who would like to make a comment, now is the time. We will have those
Hi,
comments.
I'm on the website or, the Zoom conference meeting, but I don't know, I can't get any sound. I see a lot of pictures.
Peter, you should have a.
So
is
what
there
am I doing wrong?
You might have it muted.
Because
on your
I
screen.
can't hear you.
Yeah, so it appears that you are not muted in the system, Mr. Breen, so you probably have the wrong microphone selected. In the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a microphone, and then there's a little arrow to the right of it. If you click that arrow, it'll give you a list of microphones that you can choose. Or you can hit the test speaker and microphone, which will then walk you through a guide to pick which microphone and speaker you're using. I think we're hearing you. I'm not sure if it's through the phone because I don't see a second call in.
Yeah.
We could hear him, yeah.
Yeah, we hear you just fine.
And we see you.
Why is that?
I think you're on. You're on.
Yeah, it's working.
You've
Peter,
got a
can
phone
you
in
hear
your
us now? Evidently not.
Well, I have no idea what you're talking about. So that.
Peter, do you ask him to log out and come back in?
Yeah. Mr. Breen, can you hear us? Well, now he's muted.
Maybe a communication offline would help.
Okay, well,
We hear you. Oh. Now he's
Muted.
Oh, he's muted.
Well, perhaps somebody can call him in his
Right.
cell phone and tell him to start his
No.
computer over. That's the deal.
Yeah, we hear you. You're
We hear
good.
you now.
You're good.
It's working?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
working.
But I still can't hear you.
Okay, tell Peter, if you could tell him to Peter, you can't hear us at all? Someone can let him know to go out and then come back in.
Or telephone in, whatever.
That might work.
Recording.
Yeah, unfortunately, our chat features are disabled, so somebody will have to text him that has his number.
I can.
Thank you.
Okay.
He's calling.
As we're dealing with that, I think it would be good if we do start the public comment on the non-agenda items, and if there are members of the community that are going to make comments, please limit your comments to 2 minutes maximum. And unfortunately, we'll have to cut you off after 2 minutes. So try to be succinct.
So if you'd like to make a public comment and you're in the Zoom meeting as a member of the public, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a raise hand button. click that button to queue up for public
That's too
comment. The first one for public comment that we see is Richard Brand. I'm going to unmute you, sir.
Richard,
Okay, can you hear me now?
we
Yep.
can hear you. Go
All
ahead.
right. Yeah, in terms of financial oversight, yesterday I walked up about a mile of the existing right-of-way south of Windsor just to see the construction, what was going on there. And I was surprised to find out how good a shape that whole roadbed is right now. And the rails are hardly even worn. The sleepers are good, except there's a real shortage of ballast. I mean, after years sitting there unused, I guess. And so I wondered if this group could ask staff if they consider just renovating the right-of-way rather than completely replacing. There's equipment, Caltrain did this because I was on Friends of Caltrain. They actually put ballast in, lift the rails slightly, shake them, and then put them back down and optically align. And Caltrain's class 4 FRA rail line just as smart is. And that would be these days of saving funds, probably because there's already a contract let. We can't do that, but it's something to consider in terms of savings. And I would only say you might look into having staff answer that question for you. That's my suggestion. I know Caltrain then would upgrade parts overnight, sections that needed to be fixed, but instead of redoing the whole thing, they saved a lot of money doing this. So that's just a suggestion from myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I know Bill Gamlin is on the line, it appears, right?
Yes, good morning, COC.
Do you want to make a quick comment on that, Bill? On that, or did you?
Sure, be happy to.
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks.
Generally, this railroad was kind of a hand-me-down railroad, and what that means was Southern Pacific and others that owned it over time used recycled rail. They used a lot of river run ballast, which is very rounded, not angular, doesn't lock together well. So what we found is, you're right, the underlying foundation of the track is in great shape. We try not to disturb that, but we do want to take it down to the subgrade, put in new ballast, and a lot of the ties up there are really shot. So we'd like to rebuild the railroad itself. We think it's the best use of funds available.
Thank you, Bill. Is there another question?
Yes, next up we have Patricia Tuttle Brown.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Sometimes it takes a
Patricia,
second
I think
to
you're on
unmute.
mute. You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Myself. Okay,
There you
is that good?
That's good.
Good.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time or whether it should be in the agenda item at the end, but I basically what I'd like to do is to offer to be part of the Citizens Advice, COC, which is not asking me to, or anyone. After the last SMART board meeting, there was a lot of comment about expanding the group. I know that Farhad's letter does not include that in next steps. He talks about reaching out, but my view is that I think that the committee needs to be expanded because as its job is to do the strategic plan was very excellent on the money aspect, but as far as the pathways, it was not too well vetted. Like the language wasn't always consistent. The maps, there were questions that were asked that were never really answered. There's a whole area of the Novato Narrows that's left out of the maps. And I'm not, I mean, it's not like I'm wild about doing this, but I've been a SMART supporter since the 90s. I was the chair of the Petaluma, first chair of the Petaluma Pedestrian Bicycle Committee. I more or less wrote the plan because the planning department in Petaluma was in disarray. And I have continued to be a SMART supporter. Farhad knows this. I wrote a letter to the Argus supporting Measure I and was dismayed that white people have all along, in my opinion, distorted the expenditures that SMART has made, saying, oh, the pathway deserved X, Y, and Z. But in truth, we can't even get to Cloverdale and Healdsburg, and I am an entire 100% train supporter, not just a pathway supporter. But I feel we need eyes and ears on this committee, having been on other committees, where there's a variety of people, we have eyes and ears that see things that one person that sees that others may not. So that is my public input. I have references that go back to the 90s, and I truly believe that the committee needs a few more eyes and ears. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Patricia. We do have representation on the COC from Bicycle Coalition, and Julie Violich is that person. And but I don't know, actually, Aaron might be able to answer this better than I, the process for applying for the COC.
There's no process.
Probably we should talk about that when we get to item 6. We can just,
Okay.
the idea today is to just take
Okay.
input, and then that
Okay.
goes to the board. Yeah.
Thank you, Patricia, for your comments. Is there another comment?
Yes, we show 2 more. The
Okay.
first is Joe Carson.
Okay, Joe, you're on mute, Joe. So there you go. There you go. So you're on, Joe.
Yes. Actually, my computer says Joe Carson, but I'm actually John Reed. I sit on the TAM board, but I am speaking as a citizen.
Okay, what do I call in? Which number? 9?
I'm sorry?
Whoops, who's that?
79. Okay, it says direct.
Sorry, hang on, Joe. We have John. We have there we go. I think it's been muted. Okay, John, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think that this the current situation is a big opportunity to kind of change the approach a little bit, at a more embracing approach. The last failure of the tax measure, indicated, that it did not have the support of the bicycle community, for instance, and it was kind of a full steam ahead, and we're going to get this train running on time, but it really left a lot of the community behind. And I think that it got a lot of community support when the initial tax measure passed by embracing the bicycle community. It's really an ideal situation for first and last mile, solving that and parking issues. You could, in fact, the train has a limited capacity to expand because of the single track and the 3-car limit, as you know. And by making a new center car standing room only, put as many bikes on there as you can, and maybe reducing fares for bicycle community, you could really capitalize on the enthusiasm from this section of the community, and probably also look at passing this tax measure as we go back around. Of course, that also depends on the economy, and as long as I'm referring to the COVID situation a little bit, I should also mention that stainless steel holds viruses pretty long, and hospitals have been looking into changing rails on bed rails from stainless steel to copper, because that's drastically reduced hospital infections that have been acquired. And I think it's a retrofit for touchable surfaces to use copper instead of stainless steel, for instance, for some of the vertical rails that you would hang on to. That would show that SMART is really embracing the new protocols that maybe need to go and get people really supportive of public transit, which they really need to I mean, it's a big thing to overcome. So that's
John, your 2 minutes just about up. So
okay. Well, I would definitely encourage a mood that is embracing of all people, and try to move forward in that way. And I have made comments to that effect while I'm on the transportation board, but of course I'm not on the smart board. So I would very much like to put that forward. So
okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments, John. Next,
We have Dwayne.
Dwayne.
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, Dwayne, you're on.
Thank you. I'm calling it the public comment. I also have a comment under item 5 later, but I would like to express my concern with how future audits will view a transfer of a multi-million-dollar property in downtown Petaluma based upon a 2-year-old audit. And the appraisal specifically excluded the value on its property from its being next to a smart station. And that seemed to be something that a committee, audit committee, would be interested in checking in with and seeing that that has not happened. I think the people of Petaluma would have expected that property to have been offered to the highest bidder at the best price. And and if I may have a second to say that the suggestion for copper coating, it would be nice if we just copper plated this stuff rather than replaced everything. That could be done relatively reasonably, and most cities have a plating organization, but that's just a offhand comment. Anyway, I'll look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Any other comments?
At this time, we have one more, Sheila Baker.
Okay. Sheila, if you can unmute, then you're on. There you go.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Sheila.
Okay, I just want to say to remember that the bicycle community is a lot broader than the bicycle coalitions, and that a lot of people who you saw on the train just started riding their bike after a couple of decades or a decade or something, because they figured out and found out delightfully that they could do that with the train like no other transit system. So people who got their bicycles out of their garages, you know, a vintage bicycle, and dusted it off and started using, people who bought brand new bicycles or micromobility devices. And that is very different from the Bicycle Coalition, a long time riders. If you can get the Bicycle Coalition to come on board, that's great. If you get resistance again, please remember that they aren't the total it of the bicycle community. It's really, really broad. And most bicyclists who rode the train, love the train and would love to come back. So I'm waiting for the train to come back to full speed. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment.
We have one more from Steve Brittlebaugh.
Steve. Okay, Steve.
Steve should be up here.
Yeah.
I'm going to promote him to panelist.
Excellent.
Okay, perfect. All right, there he is. Okay, all right. If that's it for the public comments, we're going to skip to number 5, which is input on Measure I, and Farhad is online, and he's going to make comments at this point. Farhad.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time today. I'm sure you had a chance to review the staff report. Basically, one of our recommendations to the board was that we request your committee to start doing some outreach, not immediately. We need to deal with the shelter in place, but perhaps you can have discussion among yourselves or email Aaron and I independently, so we're not breaking any Brown Act, of your ideas of who you think you should reach out, which organizations or groups. Or the idea is between you and our board of directors and our community outreach, we really want to do a lot of listening, and we need to do our outreach completely different. We want to invite a lot of different groups to come to our board meetings in a workshop setting and listen to them and hear from them what went right, what went wrong, and the path forward. And not just for them to come in, also for us to go out to those organizations. And then utilizing you folks as our Citizens Oversight Committee, you do the same thing, but a different group. And so between both the staff, the board members, workshops, as well as yours, maybe we reach out a very broad group of people then the idea is to gather all of that information, group them, and develop an action plan that will, shape what we do in the future, whenever that is. But how can we do a better job communicating? And it's not a one-time deal. Our thinking is we just need to do this completely different. So that's really it. I'll be happy to answer any question you have. You might want to talk about it later or think about it offline, and then we can put this back on the agenda again and get your ideas once you had thought about it. But we need to do a tremendous amount of listening and a tremendous amount of outreach to every different potential groups. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
If anyone has a question, the way to manage this, if you can just kind of raise your hand, I think there's a way to raise your hand on the screen, actually.
Yeah, it should be at the bottom of your screen.
Bottom of your
If you
screen.
move your mouse over the gallery view, you'll see a raise hand button.
Okay.
Galleries.
And also, if somebody has a comment, I just would, before we jump into that, just one comment from myself. For audit, that's a great idea. I think there's a way to engage people like Mike Arnold and others who, the less we can have it be adversarial as opposed to collaborative. I recognize it has not been collaborative at this point with him and his group, but to try and at least to look at the things that they're suggesting and try and engage them in terms of the go forward, because clearly we have to get the community on the side of SMART, and there's a lot of outreach that has to be done throughout these different groups. And I think obviously that the bicycle community, the comments that the woman made about bicyclists, not all are bicycle coalition members. So there's a lot of people out there that I think we need to just make sure that we engage and figure out what their issues are and try and address those. So that's my comment. Anyone else who would like to make a comment?
Russell, Peter's here. I've got a comment.
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that I've been thinking about this, and I'm thinking that I'm looking at the universe of voters out there. I'm not looking at the special interest groups, trails, bikes, etc. We need to bring those along. We need to try to work with Mike Arnold, and if we can, if we can't, that's too bad. I think what I'm looking at is the massive potential of the voters that are out there, all those voters who voted several times for us, like all the commuters, like all the people on the ferry boat. So I think we have a lot of information gathering that way and not just limiting ourselves. And my hope would be that Farhad and company would put out kind of a draft plan, and then we could look at that and then, chunk out the pieces that we might be able to take individually or a group. I think we're a little early at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anyone else?
Farhad, I would just like to say,
Julia?
I would just like to say that I'm not speaking from the bicycle coalitions, period, SFB, SF for Sonoma and Marin. I'm just speaking as, I guess a special interest group. But there was a lot of past miscommunications. And so I think a lot of groups feel like they're not being heard. And I do think the best thing that SMART can do is, as you mentioned, do things completely different. And actually reaching out to some of these groups and let them know that you are listening, that this is important, that you've heard the message. The Marin County Bicycle Coalition did not come out against SMART. We stayed neutral. We do support SMART and we love the train, but we weren't absolutely positive and supporting it strongly because we felt like we were not listened to when it came to the San Rafael exchange there at all. And so I just think if you can get that message out, that you are sincere, that I think everyone in this county ultimately does want to have this train in action and successful, but just to know that you're listening and not just a lot of politicians that are making up their minds that might be a good idea for their constituency.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Well,
Russ, this is
Tanya.
Yeah.
Tanya?
So
And then
a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think it would be helpful I think the listening is incredibly important, and for us to come up with a list of different community groups, business groups, et cetera, that we can help with the outreach, I think is critical. I think also being able to demonstrate that SMART is listening and responding to that feedback. So perhaps looking for some quick wins in terms of, perhaps there's a way to better represent the bike path information to the public, finding new ways to communicate, like the comment about the map and not having enough information there, I think would be really important to start showing that SMART is listening and responding to that feedback. I'm also wondering, and this may be challenging given the budget constraints that we're facing, but if we could look at also some form of online engagement tool. I think other jurisdictions and organizations have used this successfully to just broaden the opportunity for the public to provide input, to engage on key questions that SMART would like feedback on. So those are my inputs at this point.
Great, thank you, Tanya. Steve, you had a comment?
Yes, I do. To me, it gets a little intertwined with the results of the election. When I look at the results, in Sonoma County, we went down we had 74% of the vote in 2008, and we had 50% of the vote in 2020. Marin's went down by 10%. So we have a huge task in front of us. Yes, a big part of it is convincing voters of the importance of SMART and also working with the various groups. But to me, we need to do some background work. And I agree with what Farhad was saying. We do need to come up with a new strategy. And I'm not so sure if that is a staff-driven strategy. I mean, the board, of course, should be involved directly, or maybe it would be someone who could advise us on the best way to do so, because we obviously have not connected well with the voters or the groups. The other thing I really think is important is to look at what happened in this last election in detail. I have not seen a list of groups that have supported or opposed the measure. I would love to. I would love to see if there was a poll that was conducted after the election. And I would love to know what the election strategy was too in the campaign, just to see to what degree it was more than just a campaign of producing brochures and using the mail and so on. When we ran the campaign in 2008, I was on the steering committee, and we did as much as we could door-to-door work as well for direct voter contact. So I would like to know more about that as well. As far as the COC, yes, we can play a role, but I don't think we're the main driver of, going out into the community and doing this listening kind of campaign. I think the board of directors is a very critical part as well as staff. So yes, we can play a part, but we have other duties with the COC, which I know we'll discuss in a little while.
Anyone else with comment? Nope, I guess not. That being said, I guess we can move on back to number 3, which is our review of the financial report from Aaron.
Chair Colombo.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was waiting for you to ask for public comment. I might have missed it. We do have one person has their hand raised for public comment on this agenda item.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Go ahead.
first up, we have Dwayne.
Dwayne, okay.
Yes, thank you very much. I was wanting to say I was a supporter for rail since 1989, when Peter Calthorpe originally spoke of a string of pedestrian-oriented communities along the rail. I had anticipated that there's 5 major places with large amount of vacant land around the rail station. The one, of course, I was most interested in was one in East Petaluma. And I would like you, first of all, to think about the vote in East Petaluma. For Measure Q, they voted 76% in favor of Q back 8 years ago. And for Measure I, they dropped down to 48%. And the question is why? Why a 26 percent point drop? And what happened to cause that? And possibly a large number of those people that 26 points were, like myself, environmentalists, who anticipated a pedestrian-oriented community, a large one on the north end of Petaluma. And that's not what has been negotiated, and that's not what we're being told is going to be. We're going to get a park and ride next to a suburbia. And that basically tells the people, that is the environmentalists, to get lost, to not bother voting. And if you continue, if Farhad continues with this, he's likely to lose that set of voters permanently. And I don't see where this can possibly succeed next time if you lose that kind of percentage of people near your rail station. I would suggest that part of the people that also voted against it were people, or didn't vote for it, were people who didn't like the threat of having their city move to the end of the construction line if they didn't back Farhad's negotiations on this issue. And I think this committee should take a real good look at what happened in East Petaluma, as well as the rest of the Sonoma County, to see why the vote went down so markedly. West Petaluma also dropped, but not as significantly. Thank you very much.
Dwayne, thank you for your comments. Any other comments?
We have 3 more. Next up is Mike.
Mike? Okay, Mike, you have to unmute. You're on mute, Mike, so there you go.
There he goes. Thanks, Russ. Russ, I sent you a memo last night and copies.
Excuse me. Could you identify yourself, Mike? Your last
Mike Arnold.
This is Mike Arnold.
Mike Arnold.
Thank you. Okay.
I sent you a memo last night. I have no idea whether you had time to circulate it to the rest of the committee because I don't have the email address.
I actually sorry, Mike, I just saw it this morning. I apologize. Yeah. I did not have time to.
No, it's well understood, but it since there appears to be some interest here regarding our campaign and how we ran it. The memo addresses some of the substantive issues. And for those on the committee that are interested in making sure that the next measure does receive a 2/3 vote by the voters, I would strongly urge you to read that memo regarding what the content of our campaign was. That content wasn't just words. Those content, the reason the campaign worked, it wasn't just, God knows we had plenty of money to distribute the message, but it was in fact the message. And the message, it rang true with the voters. The voters found our concerns about accountability and transparency to be of great concern. And I provide an outline of that, but I think what it leads to is a real opportunity for the COC. Most people, I'm sure you're aware, most people do not know what the COC is, what it does, what the members are. And there is a key role that you could play in terms of the issue of accountability, which perceptions are so far, you haven't really been playing the role of accountability and oversight over management and the board in representing the interests of the public. And I think going forward, there really is an opportunity for you to deepen and lengthen your role. It would require additional time by members of the COC, but I encourage you to read the memo. It was written with the idea of informing this body as to what the thoughts of those of us who've been opposing SMART for a long time regarding what role you could play.
Mike, I appreciate your comments. Obviously there is not an understanding in the general community of what the COC's role is. And so I think further definition of that is important. I appreciate your comments on that. And I would also say, as we go forward, we obviously want to take into account your comments and the concerns of the community to make sure that this is continuing to be a successful transit facility that can serve this community well into the future. And I think that's real important that we look at your memo. And I know it was, unfortunately, I didn't have time to read it, but we will certainly do that, Mike, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ.
Sure.
Next up, we have Bob Williamson.
Bob, let's see. Bob, you're on mute. Take yourself off mute and then you can speak.
It says unmute now. Can you hear me?
You're good. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Bob Williamson. I'm a Sonoma County resident. I live in Santa Rosa. The point I'd like to talk about is what I would call open and honest communication. I know that SMART does have fairly low credibility, and compounded by the resistance to publish the ridership data. But when we had the campaign, there was at least one thing that I'd like to show you as an example of something that I thought was incorrect and misleading at best. And I don't know if you can see it here. This is a picture of a flyer released in December, I think it was, of last year. It's mostly a public relations document, but in the back is promotion of what became Measure I. And there's something that was touted a number of times in the campaign, and it says we're saving $12.2 million in interest cost per year. So I looked at that a little bit and I said, gee, first of all, saving interest costs, is that correct? And it's not. Most of that is debt service. It's not interest costs. And debt service, of course, is made up of interest costs plus repayment of principal. Well, in this case, maybe all of this, but certainly one heck of a lot of it, is really deferral of the principal repayments from early years to later years. It's not the saving of interest costs. That's incorrect. The next one, it says 12.2 million per year. Well, that sounds like every year, but that's certainly not correct. If you look at the cash flows, there are lower cash flows in the first 8 years. That's correct. But for the next 22, 23 years, they're higher cash flows. And overall, it's higher. So that's very, very far from saying we're going to save 12.2 million each year. And then to say, gee, this is savings when it's really deferral of moving interest payments from one year, or principal payments from one year to the next. Since when does deferral equal savings? When I see some of Aaron's writings after about the budget, it calls it debt service reorganization, not savings. So unless if you're going to use that word, you really ought to define it as, yes, lower cash flow in the early years, followed by higher outflows in the later years. It's certainly not a savings. So my point is, here's an example of, I don't know who writes these things or what process they go through before they're published, but it certainly hurts your credibility when something like this goes out. Now, can the COC come in and provide a little bit of independent thought, a little independent thinking? I would hope so. Here's an opportunity to sort of establish your role in SMART credibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think that there was, again, this is all about communication in the community and the understanding of what was really happening in terms of the debt service. And it's refinancing debt and extending it beyond. I have used the example of refinancing your house many times. It's kind of the same thing. It's extending your debt, your loan out longer term. You're not saving money, but you're reducing your cash flow demands and extending them over a longer period of time, which for a long-term asset like SMART is, and the tremendous capital requirements that a train has, it's wise to extend that over the useful life, not the remaining term, but maybe 30 years. And so I don't think everyone understood that in the vote. They thought it was just, and maybe people didn't even realize that the tax revenue was going to support this train beyond just the initial term. So I think there's a lot of work to be done just in informing people what the refinance is all about. And certainly Sarah, who's on the line, can help with that and the explanation just to the general public. And I think that will take time to get people there. So anyway, okay. Any other more comments?
I have a comment. Just to follow up on that, there's a budget, there's an agenda item later talking about the budget and refinancing. And so the comments you made and about the, Sarah being on the line, I'd like to make some comments, but I'll do it under that section too.
Okay, thank you, David. But was there any more general comments?
We show two more people queued up for public comment. The first is listed as Joe Carson. I know you had a different name. If you wouldn't mind stating it so I could rename it in the system here.
Yes, under the Joe Carson name, my name is John Reed, Johnreed, and I'm from Fairfax and representative from there. the council and on the TAM board. And I think that some of the comments around the finance going forward, I think having all that substantial financial information available is important. But also what's important is to have an interpretation such as what you just gave, Mr. Colombo, and so that people can relate to it. I mean, people know how home mortgage refinance works, or at least a lot of homeowners do. And that is language that people can understand. The nature of transit agencies is that they are subsidized by, just as highways are subsidized by lots of money from all kinds of places, and people don't really realize how much cars are subsidized. And laying that kind of information out so that people can understand is part of transparency. Also listening to people, I mean, this is related to the earlier comments, but looking at the campaign, really bringing in the needs of all kinds of people. I think the comments that there are a lot of people who see how well bicycles work in relation to SMART, who really get it and don't see SMART necessarily supporting that all that well, is important to going forward. Both on the financial picture and listening to what people really need. I think it's really important going forward. And if SMART comes off as listening to the people and being open and explanatory to where they are, you won't get these slick mailers which kind of dumb it down to a very limited message that you can get across in a flyer. And people really do appreciate being able to dig into the facts and research it, and then they will make their opinions known, and people will pay attention to that, because it's not somebody throwing money in to have skin in the game. These are real citizens. So I think it's important that with the public outreach to listen to people and provide detailed information so that they can make considered judgments.
Thank you for your comments, John. Appreciate it. Next.
Next is Willie Richards.
Okay. Willie, you have to unmute, and then you're on. There you go.
This is Willard Richards. Sometimes working through a specific problem can be helpful in learning how to deal with the broader issues. In an email that I sent to the Citizens Advisory Committee members yesterday, I recommended working out how to approach the citizens of San Rafael about the traffic problems around the SMART station. Farhad Mansourian's March 2020 General Manager's report has some excellent information on that issue. That, of course, is not a good way to get it out to the public. So working through how to get that information in the hands of the public would be a good case study for dealing with the broader issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Willard. Okay, any other comments?
At this time, we show no more hands raised for comment.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, I think at this point, do any of the COC members have any comments before we move to the next item?
Yeah, just as Dennis joined the meeting now, Dennis, I can't see his picture, but it says that Dennis is.
Dennis Harder. Dennis has joined. Janice, you there? You're muted.
Anyway.
Welcome, Dennis. Okay, any other comments before we move on? Okay, with that, we'll move on to item 3, which is the comprehensive annual financial report. Erin.
Good morning. Today, we just wanted to bring to you the annual financial report, which was completed and brought to the board in January because of all the delays in the election and the shelter in place. This is the first opportunity we've had to present it to you. I'm going to just briefly give you a couple of statistics because the meeting is already running kind of long. I don't want to talk too long about it. Basically, it's a report from our auditors, and there were no findings in the audit, and it just summarizes all our activities through fiscal year 2019, including closing the year with a net position of $467.6 million. We just have audited final revenues, such as our sales tax revenue for the year was $41.2 million, which was higher, 11% higher than the prior year. So it was a good year for sales tax revenue, probably our last good year for a while. And then it just walks through all of our financials, such as our operating expenses, revenues, and closing cash balances. So let me just stop there and see if anybody had any questions about the audit or the process of our financials this year.
Anyone have any questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Good. Okay. Is that it? Going back to the agenda. Okay, so we'll move to the discussion, the budget discussion and reserves.
Okay, I'm gonna attempt to share my screen with you right here. I'm just going to walk you through this PowerPoint. It's a little bit long, but this is the PowerPoint we presented to the board, and it is in your packet. So if you want to follow along in the packet, or you can just look at the screen. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. So we're just going to talk about the budget impacts of the failure of Measure I. The recommendation for setting a minimum reserve policy, and then the financial impact that we are currently projecting from the COVID-19 shutdowns. And then finally, at the end, it's just an outline of the budget timetable and the process. So as we've talked about already, that Measure I would have allowed for the refinancing of debt for the construction of the SMART system. You guys are very familiar with the average $12 million per year reduction in debt service that we had hoped to achieve, and we can now not achieve. So that's an expenditure we had hoped to reduce and to improve our cash flow. Now we're going to have to work on expenditure reductions of $9 million as shown during the planning process back in 2019. And this is a chart that you will all remember that we walked through together. This is the if you do nothing scenario. You know, our hope was Measure I would be passed and we could address the $9 million deficit shown there in the line called ending unrestricted reserves cumulative deficit. But this is the reason we have now talked about $9 million in reductions over time. Our original plan that we were developing, you know, starting in January through March was to do $3 million worth of reductions each of the next 3 fiscal years. So $3 million this year, $3 million for 2022, and then the following year as well. That was our original plan. And this would have solved the future imbalance and put us on a path towards being able to go back to the voters with a more balanced budget and with fewer financial issues in the future. One of the strategies we're also looking at, as you know, originally our refinance, we were hoped to saving $12 million a year, but since we can't do that, we looked with Sarah at some opportunities now, because in 2020 there didn't seem to be the market for us to save any money, but because of the, you know, unfortunately the financial crisis, there are some potential opportunities to refinance our outstanding Measure Q revenue bonds and generate some debt service savings. So working with PFM and Sarah Hollenbeck, who's on the line today, we're looking at the bond market to figure out if there would be an opportunity to provide some savings, even though there's no way we can save the $12 million a year we were hoping to save. So Sarah worked on an analysis that basically looked at rates available on April 3rd, and we looked at a taxable advance refunding, which Sarah can talk a little bit more about, and the ability to generate between $1.1 and $2.5 million in cash flow savings through 2029 when the tax expires. And this is just a projection. A number of things could affect that, including what's going on in the market with investors, credit ratings, the continued shutdown of the economy, and how the debt is structured, whether or not you make the new debt callable earlier than 2029 or not. And we're looking at two different ways of doing that: a negotiated public offering or a private placement of debt. Public offering is basically the same process that we undertook in 2011 and again in 2012 when we did the second refinancing. It's a little bit of a longer process, and we're worried that it wouldn't equal the savings that we were hoping to get through a direct placement, which is something that goes through the board. It's done through an RFP process. It places debt directly with a financing entity, and Russ, you and I talked about this a little bit, that this is an opportunity for us to save a little bit of time and to kind of be more nimble in a market that appears to be somewhat volatile up and down on a day-to-day basis. So we're working with Sarah on that, and she's on the line, and I'm going to have her weigh in at the end. Let me just run through a couple more slides just to get the whole presentation covered, to give you the picture of what we're dealing with right now. Just quickly, we also recommended to the board a minimum reserve policy starting in the 2021 budget. I presented this chart to them of the range of policies that various cities and transit districts have. You can see it runs from 8.3% of revenues up to 15 to 17% of expenditures. So there's a range. And we are recommending that minimum reserves be enough to weather a typical challenge, which of course we're not in the middle of right now, but a typical recession is what your reserve should be covering. And what we point out is that unlike a bigger city or a county, we are very dependent on sales tax, both through Measure Q and through the state revenues we receive. So we want our reserve to be fairly healthy, given that one funding source going down, as we're seeing right now, could be a problem. So we're recommending a minimum reserve of $10 million a year starting in fiscal year 21, and that's equal to 25% of our operations expenditures. It's actually a higher percentage than most entities carry, and you can see in that chart that I showed you earlier, there were not any entities that had 25%, but this is what we're recommending. And we're recommending that the reserve be $10 million. Even though we're about to cut the budget lower than that, we want to keep that minimum floor given all of the commitments we have and the operations we're trying to maintain. We also recommended the board consider a higher vote percentage for changing the reserves or tapping into the reserves, which is a practice of several entities and considered a good way to protect those reserves from being used in the future. Then just give you an overview of what we're looking at for fiscal year 20 and closing out fiscal year 20, which is the current year. We are looking at a loss of fare revenue immediately of $90,000 a week. We have staff vacancies that are starting to happen because of the virus, as well as we have new leave mandates that are unfunded. I don't know if most people know this, but the mandate from the government that we provide extended family leave to people in sick pay is funded through a tax credit, which we are not eligible for as a state-created government entity. So that's an additional financial burden. And then we have unknown Sales tax impacts, and it's unknown because of, as you know, the sales tax lags 2 to 4 months behind transactions. So transactions for March aren't really seen by us until June or July. So we won't really know how bad it is until that point, although we are working on some projections. The other challenge, I won't go into the details, but the governor's order to allow businesses up to a year to submit their tax receipts is basically a loan from our tax receipts to small businesses. So that's another financial impact we're trying to figure out the implications of in our revenues. So our initial projection is that there's going to be a loss of 20% of sales tax just in the current fiscal year, which ends in June, and then a 30% budgeted fair revenue impact also in the current fiscal year. And you can see that in the chart to the right on the slide. If you consider the 20% loss of Measure Q, as well as our state funding and the fair revenue loss, it's an $11 million reduction just in the current year alone. So they're shown in red. Fortunately, we have the CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It provided $25 billion to public transportation systems, $1.3 billion to the Bay Area, and they were given to us for the specific use of maintaining our transit staff and a reasonable level of service by backfilling for the loss of revenue and for the expenses that we're incurring. So there was a long, intense process between 27 Bay Area general managers and the MTC, and it's still subject to approval tomorrow, I believe, but we are slated to get just over $10 million, and there may be additional funds coming later because they're only right now allocating 60% of the funds that the Bay Area received, but that is the amount that's in the packet for the MTC's approval tomorrow, I believe. So this $10 million is good news for us because it fills that current year hole that we're having, and we'll be able to close the fiscal year in a manner that we had hoped to. However, as you all know, the shutdown is continuing and the impacts are likely to continue. So there's a couple scenarios that could happen. I know that, there's definitely, put 5 economists in a room and you'll get 5 different opinions. One scenario is that it's going to be a short-lived impact to the economy, but I think that's unlikely given the broad shock we're experiencing. The more likely scenario is that it could take a year or more for sales tax to return for us. So in our likely more broad and longer lasting scenario, we're preparing for a second impact of $11 to $14 million of losses in 2021, beginning on July 1. So it's significant and it's ongoing, and it's something we're going to have to continue to deal with. And again, we're hoping that there'll be more funds coming through the CARES Act, but we won't know that for a few months. All right, so just briefly to remind you what we spend money on as an agency, it's we do have capital projects that are, I'm going to talk about, administration 13%, debt service 17%, which is why we were trying so hard to refinance, and then operations 32%. And I'm just going to briefly show you what each of these slices looks like. For the capital budget, it's $51 million, and it's almost entirely grant funded. It's one-time in nature. It doesn't really drive that $9 million deficit that we were projecting in a few years. And so reducing the capital budget and our projects doesn't really impact our operating imbalance. For example, the Windsor project is funded by the state and by bridge tolls, not by the sales tax. Our administration expenses, you can see almost 60% is debt service. Again, the reason why it's so important for us to address it. Salaries and benefits are 18%, and our services and supplies are 24%. And it's a lot of fixed costs, things like IT to run Zoom meetings, the rent for our staff, it's our outreach costs, and a big chunk of that is for our rail liability insurance, which is very expensive. Operations expenses, you can see over 50% of it is our people. 107 people operating trains, maintaining the system, dispatching trains, taking care of our passengers, and a large number of them. If we run one train, we need a bunch of people just to run one train because of the requirements to keep the system up and running. We do purchase some capital equipment every year, and then we have services and supplies of 36%. And a lot of that are big fixed costs such as PG&E, uniforms, our positive train control, our fuel, all of the services that keep the train running. So we're almost done here. So our new budget challenge is a result of the virus goes on top of our first challenge, which was the failure of Measure I. So the second challenge is to figure out what the sales tax losses are going to be and how we absorb them. We had originally planned to close the fiscal year with reserves, which allows us kind of a cushion to deal in this moment, but they'll be quickly depleted if we don't address some either revenue or expenditures going forward. So our prior target of $3 million for fiscal year 21 is now increased to up to $6 million. It's an aggressive target. It's a big chunk to try to reduce very quickly by July 1 to address that need, but it's potentially achievable. And the sooner we can do it, the quicker we can weather the crisis and deal with our long-term structural problem. So just so you know, what we're going to be talking to the board about in May when our budget process begins are 3 different types of savings. One-time savings, ongoing expense not related to reductions in train service, and then expense related to reductions in train service. So our one-time savings is going to include things like deferral of machinery and equipment, trying to extend the replacement cycle for our trucks and non-revenue vehicles, deferral of certain mitigation measures and enhancements that we were planning, deferral of non-safety capital projects and matching funds to the extent that we were planning some projects funded by Measure Q, we would defer those. And then as far as non-train service related reductions, we would be looking at things like eliminating train Wi-Fi service, which is very expensive, looking at delaying our IT upgrades that we were planning. We do pay Golden Gate Bridge District for customer service. We would look to maybe bringing that in-house and seeing if we can save money on that. Of course, we're going to continue to look at debt refinancing, which I mentioned. We're looking at reducing some of our advocacy services, our lobbyists that have helped us get over $300 million in grants. Minimizing or reducing our communication and outreach contracts. Looking at the North County bus service that we're currently subsidizing that has very low ridership. And then elimination of non-critical vacant positions. And then finally, we are beginning to discuss with our unions. We have 3 bargaining units, 3 unions, talk to them about ways to reduce labor costs, which requires a wage reopener, which is the technical term to asking them to come discuss their contract, because we do have some July 1 increases that were bargained and negotiated in the last year. That would, if we could delay them, that would be a savings. So our new budget challenge, our third item is to reduce ongoing expenses related to reductions in service. So if we run fewer trains, we have a decrease in full-time staff that we can absorb. Fewer trains would also mean reductions in fuels, materials, and other services. However, we're evaluating doing that because doing so could affect revenue. So any savings from reductions in service would impact revenue. So it's a balancing act and a difficult thing to figure out how that would be impacted, but we're working on that as well. It also could impact our ability to apply for grants because the more service we run, the more attractive we are to granting agencies. So there will be impacts to our riders as we work through this, because $9 million is a humongous reduction in costs for us to absorb. There's really no way to cushion the impact of it. There's really no other place to look for reductions. Running trains is what we do. So our decision making is certainly going to be impacted by the economic downturn. The longer this goes on, the more we'll have to revisit this issue. A longer, more lasting downturn could mean that once we achieve the $6 million target, we have to look for more savings. So the budget process probably will be an ongoing one for quite some time. The initial budget process, that our initial targets are on April 15th, we briefed the board and got their input. Today, we're meeting to brief you on the budget and talk to you about the refinancing, particularly the refinancing, something we wanted to talk to you about. There is a May 6th board meeting where there could be an update on the process and where we are. May 20th is when we intend and when we normally do our first budget presentation for the board. June 3rd is their first opportunity for approval, and June 17th is their final opportunity for approval before July 1. So this is just kind of the outline of the schedule. Things are very fluid because of the, the shutdowns and the impact. And as we get input from you and from the board, we're definitely going to be flexible in how we pursue this process. Sorry, it was kind of a long presentation, but there's a lot going on here at SMART. We're basically working nonstop trying to address all the many issues we're dealing with. And I just wanted to give you this full overview so you're in the loop with what we're doing. And so let me just stop there and see if you have any questions.
So does anyone have any questions? I see David.
Well, I have questions, but I thought Sarah was going to follow up about some of the, for instance, the financing stuff. So I was going to hold my question till then, if that's appropriate.
I think, well, maybe David, if you had some specific questions that maybe you had expressed concern that we wouldn't be able to achieve any savings. So maybe Sarah, you can talk through kind of what you're seeing in the market and your experience with what SMART could still achieve at this point.
Sure. Excuse me. Good morning, all. And it's Sarah Hollenbeck with Public Financial Management. Sorry to not be on video. I had technical difficulties with that. So coming to you just by phone this morning. Aaron, I'm happy to give a little bit of an overview because there has been a lot happening in the last 6 weeks on the municipal market front, as well as kind of every other front. So just to give you sort of a snapshot, the market's been, the municipal market has been extremely volatile in the last 2 weeks of March, as this crisis became, the public health crisis became sort of spilled over into the financial markets as the sort of breadth of the problems were being better understood. The municipal market saw outflows of money from bond funds at levels we've perhaps never ever seen before. 4 weeks in a row, there were more than 10 billion of funds flowing out of bond funds, and the municipal market essentially was shut down for operation with no deals transacting in the last 2 weeks of March. However, I think the lessons that were learned in the last financial crisis in 08-09 were extremely helpful, and the Fed and Congress took swift action to intervene as they saw what was happening. So once the Fed announced plans and various sorts of programs they were going to implement to inject liquidity into the markets, things have significantly stabilized. I think as we were looking at the analysis to assist Erin in putting together her memo, there were weeks at the beginning of March where the MMD index, which is a AAA tax-exempt municipal index, it's a benchmark that we use like you might use the Treasury in the taxable market, the 10-year Treasury, or back in the old days, the 30-year Treasury. Those rates dropped by 100 basis points very quickly, turned around at the end of March as the markets were really freezing up, and went up by 200 basis points, and then have come back down by 100. And in the last several weeks, I'm just clicking over to an update slide here, the 10-year MMD, which is perhaps a little more relevant given the maturity of SMART's debt, the 10-year MMD index has fallen 70 basis points since April 2nd to today. So, and I would say that there were many days in the last several weeks where that index was increasing by 10, 15 basis points, where in normal times, if it moves 5 in a day, it's a significant move. We saw the largest single day change in MMD one day a few weeks ago. The index dropped by 65 basis points in a day, and that was following several days of 50 basis point increases. So it's been a very volatile market, but the fact that MMD has stabilized, we now are back at the long-term rate, the 30-year MMD rate being about 1.9%. And it's been that way for a couple of days in a row. So that's really positive, and even last week. So the market is sort of moving back in the direction of normal functioning. I won't say it's normal yet. And as Aaron mentioned, if you were to refinance the existing bonds that SMART has outstanding, that would have to be done on a taxable basis. And your fellow committee member, David Oster, can probably better than I, given his bond lawyer background, explain the Treasury regulations that pertain to that. But just to say, the IRS, the current rules don't allow for bonds to be refinanced on a tax-exempt basis more than 90 days before the date they can be called, which for these bonds is in 2022. However, that being said, we have seen, just given the extreme, what they call flight to quality. So as people get nervous about other parts of the financial markets, they often are comfortable with municipal bonds as a safe haven asset. And so interest rates on that asset class can fall as demand grows. Taxable municipal bonds are less common than tax-exempt municipal bonds. And there aren't as many transactions in the taxable municipal space, but there are, that market has been opening up. There were 3 taxable municipal deals done last week, ranging from $30 to $500 million. And last week also saw the first day of week of inflows to municipal bond funds since the beginning of this crisis. So I wouldn't say that the market is normal yet, but we are seeing some positive signs. Now, as Aaron mentioned, there are a host of considerations that we would have to think about as we look at the possibility of SMART being able to effectuate a refinancing of these bonds. And that would be some of the factors that she mentioned. One is going to be just where is the market as a whole and where are credit spreads. So the benchmark rates we look at are for AAA bonds. And as you know, SMART's bonds are currently rated AA from Standard & Poor's, which was affirmed last June, and single A from Fitch was affirmed last November. We know that there's pressure on the sales tax. That budget presentation clearly underscores that. It's important to remember, however, that these bonds have the first claim on your sales tax revenue. So while operationally there are significant challenges, I would offer that those challenges existed last November as well, before the tax, when the tax measure was being considered for the extension. And so in some way that's taken into account, but this is uncharted territory. as it relates to ratings and how this crisis is going to affect all issuers throughout the municipal market. Standard & Poor's has put the entire U.S. public finance market on negative outlook. Every sector, every credit within every sector is, well, the sectors broadly are all on that negative outlook. So we'll have to see, but I will say that we did inquire, as is mentioned in the staff memo. We did some high-level outreach to a number of investment banks about their interest in potentially participating in a refinancing as a purchaser, not just as a negotiated underwriter selling bonds to the marketplace, but indeed as a purchaser themselves directly. And there was interest expressed by 3 of the 4 banks we talked to. That doesn't say that it can happen if we start down the path. There may be credit issues or other issues, rates may move away from us that make it unattractive, but we think it's worth exploring further. Happy to take, so that's sort of the overview, and I'd happily take questions or comments.
Well, I'd like to comment if no one else would. This is a very technical area, as Sarah indicated, and it's not going to be, I have a perspective on this, and so I hope I can do this just as an overview. But Sarah, when you're talking about the municipal finance market, these are sales tax secured bonds. So within that market, of course, I want to emphasize to the group, if Sarah agrees with me, these are not, housing bonds or mortgage revenue or whatever, sales tax. That is probably, and I'm not an expert in this, but of all the unknowns in the economy in Sonoma and Marin with all the tourism and this and that, that's going to be an unknown for a heck of a long time. And my personal opinion is that you're going to have a very difficult time, even in this volatile market, particularly with those kind of bonds. But so that's kind of an overview thing. But another comment is that we've got existing bonds. We're talking about refinancing them. They expire in 28, 29. So there's only going to be 7 or 8 years of a new bond issue anyway to refinance those. And without getting too technical, I'm very skeptical that you could ever issue new bonds that you could refund again. So there's going to be one time. Nobody's going to pay you a decent interest rate if the bond's going to be callable soon. So you're going to basically have one more time to refinance these, I believe, these 20, 28, 29 bonds. And if you knew that you weren't going to have an extension of this, or we weren't going to have an extension of the sales tax, it may make sense to do it sometime. But if you can only do it once, and this is a matter that Sarah and I can talk about offline or whatever, if you can only do it once, it would be insane to do it unless you were sure you weren't going to extend the sales tax. So I would put that to bed anyway. And one final comment is, whether or not one agrees with me, there's not going to be a sales tax bond market for several months. As Aaron indicated, we don't even know what the effect is in this county for this, a 3 or 4 month lag. And so I just don't want people to be too excited about even a $1 million or $2 million annual savings on the debt service refinancing, because I personally don't see how it could be possible. Anyway, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, David. Any other comments from the committee?
I see one comment from the public.
Okay. Who is that?
That is Danny Sheehan-Meyer. There's another behind them too. Danny Sheehan-Meyer is up now.
Okay.
Good morning. I'll be really brief, but I just wanted to comment on the transparency issue and my experience that as a public agency, it's an incredible amount of information and sophistication of these fiscal issues. Transparency implies one has to look, but this is excellent detailed reports by staff, Aaron, Sarah, and others. They're recorded and accessible to all, but the average person will not read a 120-page report or watch the COC meeting or board meetings. And the problem is not transparency, but the ability to educate, represent in smaller pieces perhaps, and calling detractors out with these past negative accusations. You guys are doing a terrific job, and I really appreciate these presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. There's others.
Next up, we have Mike Arnold.
Mike? Yes, Mike.
I have several comments. First, and I'm going to form these comments in forms of the kinds of questions those of us who are interested in accountability and transparency would like to see the COC ask. With regards to the taxable advance refundings, one of the questions that we had during the election, because we had a muni bond advisor advising us, and they know Sarah and PFM well, taxable advance refundings have been around a long time. SMART issued high yield premium debt at the time that it issued the debt, and it's a vehicle for them, for municipalities, to lower their interest payments. And so the question is, why was this not presented to the board as an alternative before deciding whether or not to go for a tax extension measure 9 years before the current tax expires? A second question, and this came up during the election, was the use of financial reserves to fund rail operations in normal times, which, I mean, it's clear we're not in normal times now, but I'd be very interested in what COC members think about and many of you are trained in finance, what you think about the use of financial reserves for that purpose. And then finally, a point of information. The CDFTA, which is the new name for the Board of Equalization, publishes monthly sales tax data, usually around the end of the first week of the month. I have utilized that data and compared it with the budget figures for SMART and with taxable sales in some detail, and those figures are quite close to how the sales tax revenues flow. There are some minor differences due to timing and things like that. But for things like changes in trend, this information is readily available and available on the net. And the COC and the SMART board could utilize this information to get much more updated data on trends in sales taxes. For example, the CDFTA reported in March, sales taxes were not down very much in March. There's a great expectation they're going to be down in April, but they weren't down in March, and that information was published something like April's, I think I pulled it off the web on April 6th. And I would encourage the COC and staff and the SMART board to utilize this information, because obviously what's happening with sales taxes is going to be very important to this agency, and getting information that is sooner at this particular point in time is actually quite relevant.
Thank you, Mike. Other comments?
Next up, we have Willard Richards.
Yes, Willard.
In the budget that was presented to the voters in Measure I, sometime fairly far in the future, there was the promise to have $3.2 million per year available to provide the operating costs for SMART from Healdsburg north to Cloverdale. In my email to the Citizens Oversight Committee members yesterday, I argue that that was not a responsible use of public transit funds, and I would like the Citizens Oversight Committee sometime in the future to look at what SMART should be promising in the way of extending the rail service from Healdsburg to Cloverdale. I think that should not be promised before such time as Highway 101 between Healdsburg and Cloverdale becomes congested. Thank you.
Thank you, Willard. Any other comments?
Next up, we have Mike Peckner.
Mike, unmute your phone. Yeah, Mike, you're on mute. There you go. There you go. Go ahead.
Just a general comment on the budget, and I understand that I'm not privy to all of this, but one of the things I imagine is that with the collapse of the oil market, if SMART hasn't done so yet, and I think that, of course, oil and the fuel costs are something that is one of the higher operating costs, that SMART try to get locked into the lowest possible contract during this period. I'd probably wait a week or two to see, or even maybe a month to see where the market goes, but certainly a negative cost for a barrel of oil is something we've never seen before. So the opportunity is to save, I don't know how much money out of the budget, but certainly a good chunk of money. The second comment is, I would like to ask Ms. McGrath, is the Windsor extension money already allocated in the sense that it is not really part of what's happening right now because the construction is going, we have so much money allocated for that. Is that correct, or how does that work? Just curious. Ms. McGrath?
Aaron, did you want to answer that?
I guess I'm not entirely sure what the question is, but the money for the Windsor project has been allocated by the granting agencies already. So that money, does that answer your question?
Well, my question is that is there a possibility to work with Stacy Wetback Herzog to reduce some of that cost and save that money, or is that locked in?
No, it's pretty much locked in, and the costs were negotiated and are continuing to be negotiated, and are, I'm sure that's an ongoing conversation that Bill Gammon will have, but usually you negotiate those things and it's a fixed price contract, and the risk is on the contractor to deliver that product regardless of what the prices are in the market. So.
Okay, I was thinking that possibly, and of course you would not know this, but for example, the rail that's on the Northwestern Pacific Railroad right now, which will be removed, is 132-pound continuous welded rail. Some of it is still stick rail. I don't know how much money could be saved by using that rail and not buying new rail. Concrete ties are already there, so we can't do much with that, but it would seem to me that there's a possibility of saving some money there if Stacy Wetback Herzog was willing to renegotiate either the contract or a change in a work order that would allow the rail that's still there to be used by SMART on an interim basis. Since we're only talking about—
Mike, unfortunately your time is up, so I'm going to have to cut you off. I apologize. Thank you for your comments.
At this time, there are no more people with their hand raised for public comment from the public.
All right.
I just had one other question for Aaron. I actually was also going to bring up the current state of fuel costs in the U.S. to see if there was any possibility for a long-term contract or storage capabilities by SMART. And I also was wondering, Aaron, if you have any idea, if there's been any scuttlebutt about whether there will be additional monies from the CARES funding to carry us into the 2021 budget.
So on the diesel market, generally, we haven't been able to, we have no ability to store gasoline on site. It's just impossible for us to do that. But in terms of I have not seen any ability to purchase the diesel for a long-term contract. We of course will investigate to see if that's possible. It's worth noting that you need to know when your trains are going to be up and running again and how much fuel you're going to need, which is hard to figure out right now. So it's definitely a challenge. The flip side of the fuel crisis is that we get sales tax from the sale of fuel. So to the extent those are at record lows, we are also getting record low sales tax on those fuel purchases. So it's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Any other comments from COC?
Is this for a general comment about overall comments?
I meant on that,
reductions?
but I was going to move on to that. I just meant on that issue, but we'll move to the general comments in just a second. Okay. With that, I know we're running pretty late today, but I want to move to point 6, which is input on the COC role and makeup. And
Well, can we still, I do have comments about the reductions, if we could. I'm
sure,
sorry.
Go ahead, Dennis, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right. Just a couple of things. One is that you, Aaron, thank you for all the thought and suggestions. I'm sure you've probably gone through a lot of all of these. But as you put all these different reductions in here, you don't put the quantitative amount that has. And so it would be really helpful, as you say, that, listen, train Wi-Fi service, you say it's expensive. What does that mean in real dollars? That seems kind of punitive. We're trying to, advance ridership. And all of a sudden what we're doing is we're taking away the why you'd even write it. I mean, it's kind of contrary. So each one of those items of which you have here need to have the corresponding expense reduction and what it could do then in effect on ridership. And with the ridership, we only talk about expenditure reduction and we don't talk about the other side of the equation being revenue increase. And that's where I think the fallacy has been with this whole COC or anything else, is that we haven't worked towards expanding our ridership. I would love to see that we dedicate an individual that is just strictly a reach out to get the riders, to go look at table 11, where you list all the various major employers within the group, to have a reach out to them and explain the different ridership programs, to talk about the explanation of the savings. Whenever I talk to people on the street, they look at it and say, look, it's too expensive to write it. So when you go to table 12, it says, look at adult fare could be $23. Well, no, not really, because your average fare is only $5.74. Well, how does that work? And a lot of the people, a lot of the employees don't understand that. I would love you to have an employee that is strictly responsible for ridership outreach, and to see, it could be a temporary job, it would be something, but we have to work on the first and last mile. And to make smart work, you have to work on ridership and increase in ridership. And if that's additional discounts, if that's whatever, but that has to happen. And last but not least, a deeper dive needs to go in and explain to everyone the fare structure and also the ridership between stations. And I know that we've had the discussion, but we need to understand that greater, because that's the key. Whenever you talk about reducing trains, when you're doing that, how you're doing it, what you're doing, maybe you've done this internally, but I know that as a member of the COC, I don't understand it. And so those are things which would be critical, at least to me, as you move forward and ask us to look at a 5-year, plan, how that works and what to do with it. There's a lot of thought there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, I think there is a lot there, and as an employer of 300 people in the Bay Area, most of which are in the North Bay, it's we've done what we can to get ridership and to provide. I think the biggest challenge that people have, particularly in from the employer standpoint, is the locations that have a concentration of people and having transportation from the station to that place. And we've got to get companies to provide that transportation. I think that's the answer. Certainly there has been the answer for us, because we have a van that picks up people and things. And we got to sell that. I think that's probably right. Smart has to sell that. It kind of takes me to the next one, which is the input on Citizens Oversight Committee role and makeup. I think that's a big question. I don't, there's been an awful lot of discussion of the oversight of SMART and what's the role of the COC. And, I'm frankly, I was pretty clear about what our role was, which was basically a review of the strategic plan, the financial strategic plan. And it appears that the overall community doesn't necessarily understand that. And so I think that there has to be a discussion and more a greater definition of what our role is, and then not only definition for us, but definition for the community. What do they expect from us? And, I mean, Mike Arnold then puts out a 10, 12-page document that says what we should be doing. Well, everybody here on this call is a volunteer. And so, the time and commitment of people on this line, how much is it? And do we want meetings once a week, or, get so involved? I'm not sure that's what anybody signed up for. So I think that's a big question going forward. And I don't have an answer there. I'm just throwing that out as we move into point 6, as what people think our role should be and what kind of time commitment are we asking from people. So,
Hey,
comments?
Russ.
Yes,
This is Tanya. I just had a couple more comments on the current agenda item before we move on.
Yeah.
So first, I just want to acknowledge appreciation for all the folks who have joined us, members of the public on the line. For me, this has been the most well-attended COC meeting. I don't know that we've ever had one with this many people, so I think it's really fantastic. I appreciate all of the comments that have been shared with us. And to me, the questions around the budget present a real opportunity, I think, for SMART and for the COC to demonstrate that we are doing things differently. And so I would like to see a big part of the conversation around the budget be how we can engage more members of the community in that process. And so, whether they be public workshops, additional written outreach, communication, I think it's just so important, especially if we're looking at, or because we are looking at reductions in service, to do as much as possible to get input from the current writers, of course, around the impacts and the options that are being considered. And then also think about this for the future in terms of, when we do need to go forward with a new sales tax extension, how can we handle this situation in a way that really builds credibility and trust? So just a request that we look carefully at the public outreach process for these budget deliberations and use it as an opportunity to get that input.
Great. Thank you, Tanya.
Can I make a comment about the role?
Sure.
I feel like we have that 5-year strategic plan that we are involved with and responsible for according to the passage of the measure. And it seems like we gear towards that when that comes around, but there really is a lot more that happens and is needed to be reviewed in between those. And we often, it seems to me, get wound up fitting into a schedule where a decision has to be made by the board, and then we are called upon to render our opinions and observations. Well, obviously this is an example, but having said that, this is obviously a very critical situation. So here we are today. We're not going to be able to really give very detailed comments unless we meet for another 2 or 3 hours, which I don't think we'll do. But it brings up the point that we really need to have more regularly scheduled meetings and not meet so infrequently, because I don't think that really allows us to do the job we need to do. Particularly at this moment in time, I think we need to schedule a meeting within a couple months, or something logical that would allow us to react to the situation at hand. But going forth, we need to have regularly scheduled meetings, I believe, and that's something that we all need to talk about as to how frequently that needs to occur. So that's my comment.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Anyone else?
If I can make a comment, I don't know if you have any, I don't know how to raise my hand.
Okay.
Steve Bertelbaum.
You're on, Steve.
Okay. I agree with Steve's comment that we should have a regular meeting scheduled. And I'm not sure that 4 times a year is the right number. I was looking at some of the reports that were in Mike Arnold's report or comment. And I'm curious how many government agencies SMART has to report to in a year. And maybe we ought to be seeing some of those reports as they go by. And then the other issue I think we ought to know about is how many complaints is SMART getting from members of the public? Surely there are some. There is no transit rider that doesn't have complaints sometime. So I think that's an issue that we ought to be looking into. And then the third one is scheduling. How far should we dip into the current schedule in terms of cutting back, and what effects does that have? And I think that is not only a number crunching issue. I think it's an issue of public relations and oversight. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. The question is, are we up to it? Are we available to spend that much time? And should we be doing some off meeting time? Should we take on some tasks and sort of divvying them up among us as to issues that were particularly of interest to us? Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. I think that we have to be careful in terms of separating what the COC responsibilities are versus the board. And you know, we are oversight. I guess I liken it to my own board of the bank, a public company, and you know, we have a board whose role is really oversight. It's not running the business. And while we have recommendations and discussions, I hesitate, and I would caution us to not get into situations where we're trying to run the train and run the scheduling and run those things. I'm all for giving our input and giving our input about you know, community outreach and involvement of that nature. But when you get into the operations itself and the day-to-day, I think that gets a little dangerous, and it gets dangerous from the standpoint that we are not staff, and we're certainly not the operating board. So I think we have to be a little careful. I'm not saying it's a horrible idea, but I'm just saying we have to be careful about stepping into the roles that we're not in, we shouldn't be in. So that's just my comment. That's just me speaking. So anybody else have comments on that?
At this time, we have one person from the public who's raised their hand for comment.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Before that,
so let's go to David first, and then we'll go to the public.
Yeah, just real briefly on the role of the COC. You know, historically, without going into it, obviously with regard to Measure Q, we have an obligation. We need to continue that. And it sounds like because of all that's happened, there's a desire for an expanded role, more of an advisory, more of a citizen input. And my only caution on that is, without abandoning what the real beginning was, and we need to statutorily follow through with that on the committee, if the role is going to be expanded, I question whether or not it makes sense to, instead of trying to make the oversight committee that started out as one thing do everything, there might be a good opportunity for SMART itself to establish an advisory committee, maybe some of the people, maybe different people, maybe bicycle people, but rather than to try to morph the role of the COC, I realize it's two different groups, but big picture, I think it may be appropriate at least to consider a separate advisory advocacy with different constituency, meets more often, plenty of things. That's just a big picture context thing that I caution people about remembering. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Okay, did we have a comment?
Yes, we have.
I have one more comment to say. I want I agree with both David and Russ. I think the most difficult thing for this entire committee, and one of the reasons why I have not been that active, is I never really felt as if we were adding any value. We would often hear things after the fact. The board had already made decisions. And I believe that from the get-go, although we were definitely more involved in the beginning with the budget, we have not really had a great role or a very influential role. And I just want to make sure the public understands that. And so maybe doing something like David is recommending would be a role that would be more, I don't know, responsible or promoting of what the public consent might be.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we did have a comment from the public, so one more.
So next up, we have Danny Sheehan-Meyer.
Yes.
Hi, this is Annie again, and I'm speaking with Friends of Smart and as a member of Friends of Smart. And the COC's role is obviously changing. As it can't change because of Measure Q, but I would advocate, as David said, for an advocacy committee to expand your process on how to join the COC in an advocacy committee as being something that could not take more of your time. But I think you should expect to spend more time and have a little longer meetings and more frequent meetings because of the Zoom for one, and because of a greater public interest for those who support the train. That this is a great potential for the COC to expand its capabilities and influence without maybe putting less responsibility for what you're actually responsible for, if that makes any sense. Anyway, we're here to help, and those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ross, I have a comment whenever I have a chance.
Yes, yes, Dennis. Go ahead.
First of all, I think there's a misnomer between Citizens Oversight Committee and what our actual definition was under the Measure Q. And David made a great point. Russ, you also made a great point. And the thing is that the public looks at what the title is and expects us to do what it says, which is an oversight, and that's not what the role is. So either you got to change, and suggestion that David has is that you have a new committee, or two, you go back and change from the board, say your new role as the oversight committee is the following, and define it. But there's a dichotomy as to what it is, what's expected, and what obviously the public thinks it is based on the title of our committee.
Yep, I would agree with that, and I think there's a role here for the actual board to help the CIC define a very precisely define our role, and we'll stick to that. And that's fine. We have more meetings, but I don't want to have meetings that morph into discussion of many different things that we frankly have no input in. And so I think it would be a really good idea to just get better definition about what our role is, and then we can focus on those things. And I agree, it's a good idea to have regularly scheduled meetings, whatever that interval is, whether it's every 2 months or once a month or whatever. I actually like the idea that we have Zoom now. There's silver linings in everything. I think what it's allowed people to do is attend meetings more easily, and the community can also attend more easily because they don't have to go to Petaluma for that meeting. So this is good from that perspective. But my comment recommendation is that we get a better definition of exactly what is expected of us from the full board. And I think we should go back to the board with that. But other comments are certainly welcome.
Chair Colombo, we have one more public comment at this time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Oh,
Who's this?
two more. So the first is John Reed.
Yes, John.
Hi. Yeah, I think this is a very productive meeting here, and I'm glad that there's a lot of public attending. I mean, you are faced with a certain mandate to just be able to, have a certain amount of influence, and certainly in 4 meetings a year, that also limits it. So I think meeting more often is probably a good idea. But I think what's very much a good idea, and of course this is something that you've got to pass on to the board, is to have, the whole name of this committee implies that the public is, welcome to give input. And if in fact that's not the case, then something needs to be done to facilitate that. There are a lot of smart supporters. There are a lot of people who like the idea of public transportation and something that has a much smaller carbon footprint. And I think a lot of the public is really using this time of Zoom meetings and et cetera, where it's really a game changer all over the place. And they're trying to think, well, okay, this is a short-term thing, even though economically it might be pretty significant as we go forward. But there's a much bigger situation that we have to deal with as a world body, which is this climate change. And SMART is one of the things that can address that. and people are looking at their daily actions and seeing what they can do, because that's a very, very important thing that we have on our plate as a community and as, you know, citizens of the world. So taking advantage of that and getting public input, which is very much going to be present, is something that's crucial for the Smart Board to hear. And I think I would advocate for an additional committee if this one is not capable or mandated to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Next up, we have Patricia Tuttle Brown.
Yes, Patricia.
Myself.
There you go.
Okay. I'm Patricia Tuttle Brown from Petaluma. I'm referencing a little bit of continuation from what I talked about before regarding, well, I threw my hat in the ring, but that may be irrelevant if it's not asked for. But I think it's important to realize for all of you as members of the COC that it's not just the name Oversight Committee, that every word in the strategic plan is your responsibility. And that plan includes a lot more than dollars and cents, but not the rest of the plan that includes the maps, the way in which various members of the not just cycling community, and we should never say it's just cycling community, because it's always pedestrian and bicycle, which is why it's called a pathway, not a bikeway. We have to remember how it's seen by the people that care about various issues. So to separate out an advocacy group is essentially saying, well, it's essentially giving away the job to people who have no power. The Citizens Advisory Committee is given the power, and but it's only using the power for certain aspects, mostly with Aaron's reports. And I think that's why I feel that this idea of how the bicyclists went berserk is still relevant to the COC, because the strategic plan has everything in it and it becomes the Bible. A separate committee, I've been on lots of separate committees. I've given much public input at board meetings that I've gone to for more than 5 years, pretty much straight. It doesn't go anywhere. So that is my attempt at wisdom here. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. Next up is Mike Arnold.
Yes, Mike.
Oh, sorry, I was slow in the draw. There you go.
No. First of all, I would encourage you to somehow continue to use Zoom meetings. This is the second public meeting I've attended via Zoom, and I am shocked at how well it's working, despite there are issues that arise technically, but it's very pro communication, and I would encourage you to utilize that. And secondly, I think you should recognize your history here, that one of the communication issues is it's been very difficult to get the files and recordings of your meetings. I have gotten them when I needed to, but I've had to go through a special request through Matt Stevens to get the audio files. They generally haven't been posted. And just as good government rule, I think the more you can communicate what you're talking about, the better off everybody is. And I think Dennis and David have both raised some real issues that I didn't address in the memo. And what that has to do with is this broader question: is the COC the right committee to really execute oversight and represent the public in oversight responsibilities? And to the extent you feel constrained by the law, I would encourage you to advise the board that the board and staff need a real group of citizens to give them feedback on the many, many details associated with the operations of the train, the representation of finances, the information the public seeks, et cetera, and all of which is oriented toward the issue that we raised during the campaign, which was accountability and transparency. And it's apparent to someone who's been against SMART for as long as I have, I was asked this at the Press Democrat interviews. Do I think the public's going to vote for dissolution? And I said, I think if the agency opens itself up, is transparent about the issues and the constraints facing the issue because of the sales tax revenues and a variety of other concerns, my guess is the public will support another tax extension measure. They won't agree with me as an economist that this is not a cost-effective solution to the transportation problem. But on the other hand, if stuff continues to be hidden from the public and the public feels that management is not really being held accountable, I think it is quite possible that you will not get another tax extension measure passed.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. I would say that this is, I agree with your comment about the Zoom meetings, and the comments that have come on have been very good. I think that, the beginning of getting to that next election and getting it passed for the sales tax is certainly more communication, more transparency. The public certainly is asking for that, and I appreciate your comments, Mike. And we all recognize you've not been a supporter, but frankly, you've given us some good comments as to how we as an organization, as smart as an organization, can go forward. The train is built. It's time to make sure that we operate it efficiently, we get more riders, and make it the transportation system that's so important to this North Bay community. So thank you for your comments. I think I'm going to have to close off the comments now because we've really gone way past our time, and so all those comments will be summarized and they will go to the board. And I think a dialogue with the board about our exact role is really in order at this point, because it just seems like no matter who you ask, we all have different opinions about what our role is, and it should be very clear. And I'm not sure everybody is of the same opinion, so I think that's an important step that needs to be taken. And then I think we need to have regular meetings. I don't know what the interval is, but we can, I've heard every 2 months, every month, whatever, but we do have to have regular meetings and follow the mandate of what is asked of us so that we can give good input to the board and take good input from the community, because that's really important. This communication has to go both ways. And the way for all of this to be successful is to open up the lines of communication and express the concerns of the community to the board and vice versa. So anyway, Peter, did you have a comment? It looks like you were.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, okay. My sense of this meeting is this is a huge watermelon or turkey or whatever that we haven't had the time or the energy really to deal with it. I think the role of our committee needs to be looked at very closely. And I think one of the difficulties that I see is that we meet so rarely as people have said, it makes it very difficult to, for continuity, et cetera. But one of the observations I have to make is that our board of directors, they are all elected officials responsible to their electorate and their town and their budget and their crisis and their whatever. So they're not as able, I don't think, as we are to deal with a whole lot of the issues we've been talking about today about getting support, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm suggesting is that each one of us put down our suggestions to what we should be doing ahead, and then put all that together and either have staff or a couple of us on the COC put that together so that we can bring it back to the COC to try to limit some of our discussions and our wide-ranging discussion today.
Can I make one last comment?
Yes, Steve.
I've served for many years on the Open Space Districts Advisory Committee, and they have a Citizens Oversight Committee as well, and a board, the Board of Supervisors, that are the decision makers. I think it might be worth a look at their organization and how they structure that, because I think it was David's suggestion about an advisory committee makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of other issues that don't fall so specifically into the financial aspects of this situation. So I really think that would be a good place to look. So that's my suggestion.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Okay. There's been a lot of things thrown around, so I would like to kind of get that summarized. Aaron, can we get a summary of the comments here? And I do like the idea Peter threw out as to getting everyone's ideas. I want to make maybe what we can ask is that the COC members kind of summarize their thoughts and bring them to the committee. I don't know if that maybe should come to me or maybe just go directly to Aaron, and we can summarize those. Aaron?
Yeah, I think they should have them come to me and to Letty, to the extent people have Letty's email address, or you can mail them hard copy. It's best to have them come to me, Russ, so you don't have to be the, your email, I'm sure, is full. Is that we can, of course, summarize what happened at this meeting today, present those to the board. I'm sure the board will have open hearings on these issues because they've already talked about doing it. And so I think it's going to be a several month process of figuring it out and figuring out what it's going to look like in the long run.
Okay, so if everyone on the COC can summarize their thoughts on these, but specifically about what the role should be, I think is really important. And I just want to make sure everyone on this call, and those that aren't even on the call, we should all have a very clear, concise understanding of what we're supposed to do and how often we should be following up on this. And I do like the idea of more meetings. The question is how often. Maybe every couple of months is more likely. And this does make it easier having Zoom because there's less travel time involved. And I think even going forward, when we get out of this mess, we can take advantage of technology. It really helps a lot, I think. So go ahead and do that and send those comments directly to Aaron. Is there any other comments before we have to set a time for our next meeting? Thoughts on that? It's April 21st, so
I'd like to see us meet soon, like within a month.
Yeah.
I guess it would be helpful to understand what, we need subject matters that you're interested in discussing, and that might drive the next meeting.
Well, I think it would.
Yeah, go ahead, Tanya. Go ahead.
Would be helpful. I think it would be great if we could come back together and review all of the COC comments, the summary of the meeting, and formulate more of a recommendation to the board, or maybe there's options that we would want to present to the board. So having the opportunity to come back and do that, I think would be great.
Yeah,
I think that's good.
My suggestion here would be financially is that to see the 9-month ending, the actuals for March 31st, and then 2 is to have the various items that you suggest as reducing costs, what those are, additional suggestions that are there, adding people for the first and last mile to see what we can do for ridership. Those type of proposals and suggestions to see what the actual effect would be to what we could do going forward would be helpful. I think within the next month, if you can get those, that'd be great.
I think it's all 3 of those topics are humongous, and we could end up having another 3-hour meeting. And I think ideally, from my perspective, I guess I'm wondering if the idea is, so you've mentioned the makeup of the COC, first and last mile, and the budget impacts. I mean, if there is another meeting in about a month, really all we're working on right now is the budget. We can't really tackle all those other issues until the budget is solved. Because honestly, all of the things that you're talking about require staff time and resources. And all of our staff time and resources are right now geared towards operating impacts and the financial crisis and keeping our trains running during this crisis. So the reason there aren't any details in the presentation I gave you is because we're still working on it. The crisis is 6 weeks old, and we're still working on what that looks like. what we were trying to do was give you the areas we're working on, and those are all forthcoming in May for the board. So I think if there is a meeting in May, it would be focused on purely on the budget impacts right now. And so I would suggest maybe we could present to you as we are working on the budget presentation. I'm just going to look at my calendar real quick.
With that said, wouldn't you have the actuals though? Wouldn't you have the actual financial information as a basis to do all those things?
Here, Dennis, I have one comment on that. And I have to say the actual results through March versus what's happening in this time from April 1 to June 30 are completely different. And I'm not sure what the first quarter, again, I kind of go to my own bank. The first quarter was really not impacted, other than certain things, but for the most part, not impacted by what's going on. Yet the second quarter is going to be huge. And so I think that, so we don't spend a lot of time on financial reporting in terms of the second quarter or the March quarter. I would suggest talking about budget items and maybe also talk about COC responsibilities and accumulate these things. Everybody gives your input, and then maybe we can spend some time trying to come up with recommendations that we have for what our responsibility would be. And maybe it includes having committees, separate committees, but going back to the board, if that's something that people would agree with. Other thoughts are certainly, if anybody has other thoughts, please jump in. Peter? Okay. Nope. Okay, David.
I have just following up on that. So we're going to, the members are going to summarize our thoughts from the meeting, and particularly I'm interested from this about the future role. And once that's received, we're to send them to Aaron and Letitia. And then rather than, I think this is what you're going to say, is rather than meet to go over little line items of budgets, updates and stuff, maybe we could focus as a committee on what we think our responsibilities are. We recognize the need for some other input for advisory stuff, and have an internal or another discussion at our next meeting about putting those ideas together. What do we want to recommend to the board that we do, or would there be another committee and we're limited to this? But I think we can deal with that without interfering with SMART's budget stuff currently.
I agree with you, David. So if everybody's okay with that, why don't we plan that, and maybe we can have a meeting in a month or so. That would put us out in the third week of May. Maybe we'll have a better idea of what the coming out party for this situation is. Let's hope we have some return to somewhat normal activities, but who knows? My suggestion would be either the third or fourth week. The fourth week is Memorial Day. We could do it that week, or we could do it the week before. What's everyone's preference?
Well, the week before we have a board meeting on the 20th, so that week is going to be pretty busy unless we do it after that board meeting.
Okay. Should we just the 26th or 26th is the first day after Memorial. I would move it to the 27th or 28th if people are okay with either of those days.
Yep, those work for me.
Okay. Any of those 2 days that are bad? Because we'll just pick the 27th if that's okay with everyone, unless anybody has a problem. Nope.
27th is good.
Okay, the 27th, we'll plan it. It'll be just like this, a Zoom meeting at this point, unless something changes. Is the time appropriate, or should we change it to make it earlier so that we can get through stuff?
Earlier would be better for me.
Better? Okay.
Earlier is good for me too, anytime. But
what time? Like 7:30 type meeting, or 8 o'clock?
7:30?
7:30, which is when we have our SMART meeting. Our meetings anyway. Let's go at 7:30 on the 27th.
Okay.
Okay, so just for clarification, the two items that are going to be on the agenda are the summary and discussion of all the comments on the makeup and the role of the COC or other committees that we can forward to the board after that meeting. And then I can update you on the budget and the cuts that the board will be contemplating, because by that time we will have more details that we're presenting to the board.
Perfect. That's great. Okay. Is there any other comments before we adjourn?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all for your time. So unless we have any no's, then we will adjourn. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, okay.